Okay, thank you very much. When asked what I should talk about, I thought we should address this issue a little bit about reef restoration and adaptation, which are being offered up as solutions to the problem of coral reefs and climate change. I was very pleased to hear that David said that this solution is sort of out there, that mitigation needs to be achieved first, and also for specifying the fact that we need to be very clear about what our solution aims to achieve with regards to which problem, yes? So when we're doing planting robust or engineered robust corals, what are we aiming to achieve with that? Yes, what problem specifically are we aiming to achieve? So for those of you who don't know me, I've spent the last 6 years playing with mesocosms, okay? And the aim of my mesocosms has been to reconstruct mini reefs and subject them to average end-of-century scenario treatments. And these are for recovery years, okay? So to understand the type of effects that you might expect in an average recovery year. When I've done these experiments for a number of years now, what I find is that my corals that survive are fleshy, single polyps, okay? Heaps of aptasia, fungia. They do quite well, even in the worst of the treatments. Fleshy ones like this Lobophilia or the Platyjara. Yeah. Other people, and my experiments expose the corals to both the acidification and the thermal effects. Okay? Other people have done experiments with high doses of acidification. And this is a one-off, but it also specifies the theme I want to illustrate here, that under stress, often corals favor biomass over expansion in space. And for me, that makes a lot of logical sense. Okay? Under stress, the cost of maintaining biomass goes up. Okay? New biomass costs energy. If you're going to expand in space, you not only have to maintain the biomass you had before, but you've got to provide more energy. Calcification is really expensive. Primary, then secondary calcification to become really strong. So it's not unusual that in a stressful situation, you might see blobby things, corals materialize, rather than things that we usually associate with building reefs. In contrast to that, if our solution here is to preserve some of the key reef structures, okay, one of the key ones I always think about is this net carbonate balance on the reef. You know, many of the services associated with reefs are associated with that. With a net carbonate balance, the rate of calcification has to be greater than the rate of erosion. Okay, and it's a very simple equation here. If we go into the deep sea where there is no light and where there are corals without zooxanthellae, they can grow really slowly because erosion is pretty slow down there, so we can build carbonate reefs. If we come up into the shallows, however, the reef builders, the bioeroders, and even the waves that pound in and tear apart the reefs on a regular basis are all solar powered. Okay? So we need to have really rapid rates of calcification to stay put. So how fast the coral has to calcify is also dependent on where it's located. Even if we take a shallow coral reef, in the fore reef, they have to calcify more than potentially in the back reef, where they're less subjected to physical erosion. So, in the future, reefs might lose a lot of their coral cover. I think it's, whatever we do now, we're going to see losses of coral cover. And so the question is raised is, can we replant robust corals? Can we engineer robust corals, okay, to service some of these functions, okay, that we require and want to be present on reefs? If you look at this picture on the left-hand side, the problem of scale is very evident. even if we manage to have aquaria and grow a certain number of corals, we're never going to grow enough to repopulate a whole reef. The corals we put out there are going to have to grow fast, okay, and they're going to have to grow appropriately to survive in the environment in which we place them. When we're trying to solve this thing, we tend to think we know what a robust coral is. But actually, what a robust coral is depends on the solution, or rather the problem you're trying to solve. Okay? So often, we throw out the fact that a robust coral is one that tends to hold on to its symbionts for a lot longer. Yes, that likes to hold it. When temperature goes on, it holds them for longer. We produce legends in papers like this, okay, where we call a dark coral a healthy coral and a white coral white, and we see a transition to less dead. I think this is an implicit assumption that as you go from the top here to the bottom, the coral is becoming less healthy. I don't argue that case in normal reef circumstances. A zooxanthellate coral is going to calcify faster than one that doesn't have zooxanthellae. It's going to accumulate biomass more than that. But when we're talking about stress and thermal events, we are not in normal circumstances. And my feeling is we should not preempt this discussion of whether that dark one is healthier. And I like the Jones and Berkemon work that was done in about 2010 and 2011 in the field with Acropora, bleaching sensitive, bleaching tolerant zooxanthellae. Because what it showed to me is if you consider the things that you might need to repopulate reefs for them to expand and live, that in actual fact, in this case, it's the bleaching sensitive one that wins, and actually after a bleaching event they both lose. So neither the white nor the dark one are healthy in this context. Okay? So when we say something is healthy, we have to be very careful. What are we selling here? Is it a healthy symbiont population? Is it a healthy coral population? Is it going to lead to a healthy reef? We can't transition directly across from one to the other. We have to establish that fact. So what's happening to our reefs? 2015, 2017, we've heard it. Diabolical heat wave, I call it El Niño event. Really the third global event in a series of global events. I'm playing here videos taken by Christine Brown in the Maldives, 2015 before and after in 2017. This we witnessed 3 weeks from 0 to 30 meters, devastating. For me, bleaching is the symptom that all is not well, that there are abnormal conditions that are presenting to reefs. The problem is this. The problem is death, mortality, no growth, no coral. That is the problem, not the bleaching itself. People, to some extent, in 1998, didn't sit up and worry too much because we had bleaching, but we didn't have the ensuing mortality. These events are becoming more frequent, they're becoming more intense, and they're lasting longer. Okay? They don't hit every reef every year. It's a stochastic, or maybe there's more structure to it than just simply stochastic, but a lot of reefs get hit in them, and as we get more intense, that occurs. Terry mentioned that the impact on the coral, the mortality, was very clearly linked to the thermal stress they experienced. And I've just put these up. These are what we call degree heating weeks. It's basically how anomalously hot it was times how long it lasted. Okay? And the fact that they come across the baseline and that they were above a DHW of 8 for more than 2 months, both in the Maldives and in the northern GBR, fully accounts for why we saw so much dead coral. What I like about Terry Hughes' paper from 2018 in Nature was this statement that I picked out most, okay? That whether a coral bleached or survived wasn't particularly linked to its bleaching sensitivity, okay? Just because you bleached first didn't mean you would be the first to die or die at all. Okay? And I think that is important. Corals, as Pete said, recover. Okay, there are recovery periods. And we know that if we get 10 years, we can at least get something at the beginning and end that looks like a reef. At least we can see that in this moment in time, given the recovery conditions that we have. I remember Bellwood once showing a picture like that, and he looked underneath in a talk and he showed the scaffold was very weak. Just because that looks healthy, it doesn't mean it is. It doesn't mean that the skeleton is strong enough to withstand the wave energy. It doesn't mean the tissues are thick enough to be used as storage products if stress comes along. Okay? But they can recover. Moving forwards, for me, these wave events are going to happen. They're going to get worse. And the big question is, what happens between them? Do we assume recovery stays the same, or does recovery change its rates and its potential? Does it lessen? And we need to do that with regards to the different scenarios. And we can't wait to the future to find out whether that's going to happen. We have to do it in mesocosm experiments, and I must admit, we have to take averages and we have to add anomalies. Yes, we have to do it fairly broadly. If we take business as usual, the red, if we don't quite make Paris, but we make some effort, the yellow, or the Paris at the bottom, and we go to Heron Island and we take what was a relatively cool year, or 2012 to 2014, and we add those anomalies on the top, we get these degree heating week pictures. What you can see is, basically, if we don't do anything, the average year is going to look pretty much like what occurred in 2015, 2016 in the northern GBR. It's not surprising that when I run my mesocosm experiments for these years, what you see is the corals bleach, some bleach and come back again, and some die. Okay? It's not surprising that you see these patterns. What you'll notice as you go through here, it's my fleshy ones and my single polyped ones that do that bleaching and come back. If we take them to the business as usual, I've played these before, but some people haven't seen them, so I thought I'd play them again. It's just a rack and ruin. There's no hope under business as usual. And remember, what I'm trying to model here is a recovery year, and there's no storms in my tanks. There's a big wave maker, but no storms. And it's a nasty picture after 20 months, okay? For me, one of the most important things I want to say here is that under 4.5, I got some coral that survived. The thermal event only really affected 6 months of the year, coming off the baseline, not the full year. But the coral growth that I observed by day in those tanks is not significantly different from a business as usual. There was no growth really to speak about it, okay? Acidification has an innocuous, nasty side effect, okay? Whilst corals that have their tissues might be relatively protected, when the reef dies and there's no coral over the top of it, all that calcium carbonate is exposed, and we do get, especially at night, decreased dissolution of what is there. So I just want to focus quickly on what happened with these corals, the big survivors, okay? They bleached, and they bleached first. They bleached before the Seriatopora and the Stylophora. Sometimes these are weaklings in the terms of coral survival. At least in my experiment, they all died. Sometimes they even bleached before my Acropora started to bleach, okay? But they survived. So I want to return to the properties of robust corals, okay? So what I've said is under stress, they're likely to favor biomass over growth, okay? That makes sense. But I want to know is if they are subjected to stress regimes quite frequently, do they inherently adopt that framework, okay? And so I'm going to places on the reef where we get fluctuating temperatures, like Palumbi did, yes, where you've got high variations in temperature, high variations in light, and high variations in PCO2. And I want to ask whether con species from those locations and off the reef slope have inherently different growth regimes, irrespective of where you place them on the reef or which experimental system you put them in. How plastic is that? So I'm going to start with Heron Island. In this work, I have to thank two of my students, Vanessa Clark and Matt. Mello, he's been with me for 4 years and I still can't pronounce his last name. But basically, Heron Island looks pretty much like this, and we have racks, and we do reciprocal transplantations with corals from the reef-flat and conspecifics from the reef slope. And we've done it with Acropora intermedians and Parietes cylindrica. Okay? And so what you can see on the figure over on the left there is a highly variable thermal regime on the reef-flat. It ponds. Okay? PCO2 does the same, light does the same. It's much more stable on the reef slope. If we do the reciprocal transplantation over 6 months, we don't get an interaction effect for location, but we get a very strong origin effect. Those from the reef flat that are subject to that variability, those stressors, put on protein and biomass, and they don't grow out in expansion in area, in surface area, they don't increase in volume. We can see the same for 18 months for Parietes cylindrica. I've got a different measure of skeletal growth here. It's buoyant weight change, but it's still the same. Unfortunately, Matt hasn't quite got his protein and biomass done yet. But what he has done is, in experiments where we've subjected them to RCP 2.6 recovery, we've asked the same question. And it's still the same here. It doesn't matter, okay, what conditions you put it in. The reef-flat ones always preference biomass over actually growing out in 3D space. So conclusion, what does this mean for the potential to go from here to maintaining reef structure? Okay. For me, we need them to grow. Okay. I don't think we can engineer them to grow that way. We might be able to, we might get lucky. But I think we need to consider what we are actually trying to achieve by engineering corals. Is that just to ensure the sustainability of corals, irrespectively of whether they can service the functions that we require of them on the reef? What does it actually mean? Thank you.